We are going to continue our discussion, about our feedback to our discussion board, and I wanted to kind of finish up on some points that were brought up. Uh, this in essence question that Breyer you asked, it was about never understand why gang members take such offense to things like colors, what people wear, all these little identifiers. Okay, so there's there are some different explanations for it. Well, for one, I mean the obvious one as far as different colors. Um, those can represent obviously different gangs, different affiliations. Because there's if you really want to get into the gangs, you're talking about Folk Nation, People Nation, and those are the affiliates, if you want to call it that. Um, and even the colors represented by those groups are usually similar. Um, in addition to the singular gangs, such as I'm not going to go down to like say specific street levels, but I'm going to say like your Vice Lords, Latin Kings, Gangsters Disciples, um, or any group along those lines. Peace Stones, depends on what city you're in, what you're going to see more of. But needless to say, yeah, colors make a difference. Whether it be from people or People's Nation or Folk Nation. Folk Nation uh, is usually your colors like, say, black or blue is probably the most common color, but black and blue are the top two colors. There are other colors that factor into that, but that's what we're going to focus on for right now. And then, they have certain signs and symbols, such as the pitchfork, or some people call it a trident, but basically it's a pitchfork. Um, and then you have the Star of David or six-pointed star. Um, those are all symbols. You also have for different ones, for instance, with Gangster Disciple. Uh, there are some other ones. Like you might see 7-4 written down. Okay, 7-4 is simply standing for the G is the seventh letter in alphabet. D is the fourth. So that's really simple. Also, there are ways to disrespect another group. And I know I'm kind of getting away from the original question, but I will come back to it. But while it's on my mind, I want to talk about some of these symbols, some of these, the tagging that goes on. Tagging is basically for lack of better terms, it's graffiti that is a gang's way of saying that certain turf or certain areas, belong to them, or they control it, have authority, or run that area. So, like I said, the symbols I just gave for the Folk Nation, okay, and like I said, the pitchfork is something you'll see. You'll also see, let's see. Um, Things that basically symbolize death to People's Nation, and whether it be the Bloods. So I guess I'll cover real quick your some of your more common um, Gangster Disciple. Excuse me, your more common Folk Nation is going to be Gangster Disciples, Crips. Those are probably the top two that you're going to come across in terms of numbers. Okay, so there's a lot more to them, but either way, there's that. And then if you go into People's Nation, which is primary colors are red, black can be used, but also like a yellow or gold, if you want to call it that. And this one you're looking at, let's say, the Vice Lords, Bloods, Latin Kings. Those are probably if you want to call it, once again, the most popular or biggest affiliations with People Nation. But as far as symbolism, I already discussed that with Folk Nation. But as far as People Nation, you're going to be looking at things like, let's see, the top hat. You'll see the Playboy Bunny, rabbit, or something similar to that. Sometimes a margarita cup, glass, whatever symbolism. But it's usually the rabbit is what you see the most. You'll see 5-point stars. The number 5 by itself. Same thing goes with going back to folk nation if you just see the number 6 by itself. No, or in some sort of configuration that also works for them. So those are some of the key identifiers. Also, it depends on, and this is something we don't need to get into great depth with, but in essence, um, um, as far as what side you're representing, in essence, whether it be what pant leg is up, whether it be which way your hat faces, or is directed on your body, that goes into which nation you belong to or which gang you belong to. Uh, I already discussed colors. Something I did want to point out, a little interesting fact about gang history, uh, that at one point in time, gangster disciples, they were not a part of a folk nation, and in fact they had some issues with them, which, so basically they didn't get along with, they're kind of on their own, especially, they didn't want to necessarily get along with the Crips, who were at that point in time the big group of um, uh, the biggest group that was representing uh, folk nation. But while they were in prison, or different, some of the higher ups were in prison, they decided to, for the purposes of protection while in prison, that's what actually made them decide to kind of go together, or at least be somewhat cooperative. And when it comes down to it, they're still basically only concerned with their own gang and their own people, not necessarily the entire. It's kind of like having allies. The U.S. has allies, but if it comes down to something between, the U.S. and, let's just say, Great Britain, well, obviously we pick U.S. interest over Great Britain, even though we may go against a common enemy at some point in time. So um, let's see, what else do I want to tell you about some of those without getting way too in depth with the gang history just yet. So, but yeah, there's that side of it. Going back, I know I'm jumping around here, but I'm going to answer that original question about why those things matter, why people get so offended. A lot of it is about turf. A lot of it is about a lot of these people are raised in an environment, or choose to live in an environment, to where everything is considered a challenge to you. So rather than thinking rationally about, hey, someone accidentally stepped on me, like you're in a busy, say you're at a school, it's busy, a lot of people walk around the hallways, whatever, someone steps on your foot or bumps into you, most people realize, hey, it's crowded, they're just bumping into me, it wasn't intentional. You use your rationale to say, or you think about it rationally and say, okay, it wasn't a big deal, it wasn't, no one was trying to challenge me. But in that environment, the way that people are raised, or even not raised, in terms of being taught the right way to think about it and handle stress, or how to handle simple situations, a lot of them, even as they age chronologically, mentally, and maturity levels remain pretty low, and so they feel like every little thing against them is a challenge against either them individually. What are you going to do? You're going to be a man and do something about it, or you're going to let someone walk all over you, or disrespect you because they said something that either you didn't like, or that maybe you didn't understand, so therefore you don't like it, or they're wearing you can't let, because it's all about turf and ultimately about money that you make from drug sales or other illegal activities. You can't let some other gang or person come in and disrespect you, or disrespect your gang, or challenge that. So rather than thinking about it rationally and just dealing with it, or whatever, that's where they lash out. And they, even people who are basically innocent, that's also something people who are not involved with gangs need to be aware of, is you need to pay attention to what you see. and just be smart. Don't go into places wearing stuff that you think could possibly cause issues, and it's part of your own fault for being naive if you go to those places and choose to do that. So, but that's essentially the answer to why they act that way. They're never taught any better or any different, and they are afraid basically of being looked at as a fool, and that's how they look at it. So rather than just dealing with it rationally, they had to show how tough they are. So that's essentially all I wanted to get across with that one. And I did want to bring up another point about gangs in terms of things you might see in graffiti or different symbols, tattoos, etc. Usually tattoos that you see will still have those symbols on it, but they will all be, if you want to call it positive, but they will be promoting the gang that person belongs to, not disrespecting. So like when you have tagging that goes on, you can have disrespect. So say a Vice Lords group comes in and writes, has their tags a particular area. Someone comes in, say from I don't know, a Gangster Disciple comes in, they can write over that, but usually what they would do is they may mark out the other information. They may put death to um, death to whoever, Vice Lords or whatever. That's just an example. Or turn it around. It's probably easier because that's what's come to mind right now. Is sometimes you'll see People Nation gangs that will put up draw or paint the different symbols that will show a couple things. One, downward trident, which basically is disrespecting either Gangster Disciples or Folk Nation. And also, they may put on there, let's see, I've seen one that was disrespecting basically all of Folk Nation and especially Latin Kings, because Latin Kings, hence the name, Latin Kings, will sometimes have a symbol of of a king, basically. And so what I've seen before is a downward pitchfork acting as what looks like a crown, but it's basically mocking because it has a downward trident and because it's a supposed king. It is putting down Latin King. So let's see, what else do I want to tell you about? And I said that incorrectly earlier about Latin King. So either way, don't worry about that. Let's see, what other symbolism do I want to tell you about? Gang signs, with hand signs. I definitely can't do all those, but you guys can look those up and see them. It's interesting because you'll see a number of, if you know what to look for, you can actually watch different, say, professional sports and see people who have been members of gangs and still are affiliated with gangs. Because for one, you'll see tattoos, but then you'll also see them throwing gang signs during gang. So you just have to know what to look for. So, but yep. Let's see. One of them who was caught doing it more often, he I think had retired a couple years ago, but Deshaun Jackson was one. He was a Crip, but he was also throwing signs during games. But I've seen it in NBA games, and I've seen it, like I said, in NFL games. I don't see it a whole lot in other sports, but those primarily. And let's see how we're doing on time, maybe. So it looks like I'm getting close to 15 minutes. Next video will be on the origins, something. So I will talk to you later.